I posted this on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube. And I basically gave a rundown of the whole birth certificate argument that the Black community likes to pit against Black men. Because we all know the statistics have that standard of error rate. Everything looks great. They've been doing these studies since 1973. And Black men, most of us have never fathered children. And for some odd reason, the Black community doesn't like that because they assume that we have to be the issue when it comes to the children that are wedlock rates, so on and so forth. We discussed this multiple times. So this is why I put, gentlemen, Black men in particular, do you want to read something that'll scare you? In 2006, Wiley Online Library published a study conducted by the Department of Population and Family Health Sciences, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, titled A National Sample of U.S. Paternity Tests. Do Demographics Predict Test Outcomes? It goes on to say, nearly 300,000 paternity tests are performed in the United States annually to include or exclude a male as the biological father of a child. Their objective was to document the demographic composition of test subjects and to determine how well ethnic background and age predict paternity inclusion. And again, it's from 2006 for context. The results of that test, it said the test results indicated paternity inclusions in 72% of cases overall. So, and I know a lot of folks, and I did this for a reason, not to insult your intelligence. I know a lot of people aren't in the medical field, so I gave the definition for you. So your question, what is the definition of inclusions? The answer, a paternity inclusion is a DNA test result that states that the test male is most likely the biological father of the child. This is because the genetic markers of the alleged father and the child match perfectly. So that's what inclusion means. In other words, a paternity inclusion means that the man is the father of the child. So if 72% of the DNA tests were correct, then that means 28% were not the father. But the percent included varied little across racial and or ethnic categories, with a low of 67% in African Americans and a high of 82% among Native Americans. But these differences were not significant in multivariate analysis. Explanation. Among African American men that were DNA tested out of the 9,999, or 33%, 1/3 came back not the father. Okay? So that's important. So did you guys understand what I just said? So if, let's say we extrapolate that to the whole Black population of Black men. If DNA tests were mandatory, right? If every test was mandatory and all Black men got tested, there's a high probability that 33% or 1/3 of those tests would come back not the father. Even 1% is too many, because that's why this is listed under the fraud category, because sometimes women do this willingly and they won't tell the man because he won't get tested, or they'll put up a fight and say, hey, I don't want you to test my baby. That means that you don't trust me, so on and so forth. So that's why you see a lot of men fighting for inclusions of the DNA test once they do the blood panel after, postpartum and all that stuff, right? So yes, 33%. This is where you guys can read the study. This is from the Wiley Online Library. And here's everything circled for you. So if you want to go ahead and read the full article, you can. They also have graphs that prove how they tested. They have the results right here. And this is basically me, circling the synopsis that I read for you guys. And results right there. So let's stop there. So I said, even though this study was published in 2006, 18 years ago, do you think the 33% of not the father results increased or decreased? Lastly, do you think if 100% of Black men were DNA tested at the child's birth, would this increase, raise, the 46% of black men who have ever fathered children, or decrease / lower? Now, the reason why I asked this question is because this is where the tricky part comes in for the black community, because everybody else outside of us logical folks over here believes that the number would increase. However, I have an answer for you, just in case you guys get into an argument on social media or a discussion. Let me show you. I'm going to read something for you. So this is from the Tyranny Lab, and they asked the question back in, I want to say 2007. And like I said, this is a historical dump, so you guys can do the research for yourself. So it says, what percentage of your ancestors were men? And I'm quoting the article. No, it's not 50%, as I'll explain shortly. But first, let me credit the source, Roy F. Baumeister, who answered that question, and a lot of other ones. And he addressed this on one of their Friday annual conventions at the American Psychological Association in San Francisco. And you can actually read his speech, his whole speech, titled, "Is There Anything Good About Men?" So at the bottom there, it states, the single most underappreciated fact about gender, he said, is the ratio of our male to female ancestors. While it's true that about half of all the people who have ever lived were men, the typical men were much more likely than the typical woman to die without reproducing. Citing recent DNA research, Dr. Baumeister explained that today's human population is descended from twice as many women as men. Maybe 80% of women reproduced, whereas 40% of men did. So, did you guys hear that number? Sound familiar, right? 40% of men, 80% of women. And this is from a historical reference. So when you see black people use this excuse of saying that, well, nah, black men are the anomaly, I'm pretty sure that all these black men are having these children. No, since the beginning of time, most men have never procreated. They were more likely to die without reproducing. So this is the response that you need to have to people who question if black men really have, if 46% of black men have ever fathered children. It's actually probably lower. And he also responded to people who may have some backlash. He had to update it. And the doctor said, before anyone else posts a comment, insisting that it's mathematically impossible for any individual to have an unequivocal number of male-female ancestors, consider the following. There are two women, right? Let's say Ginger and Mary, and two men, Gilligan and the professor, Gilligan's Island, on the deserted island. Both women spurned Gilligan and had a child with the professor. You see that? So they didn't have sex with Gilligan, but they did have sex with the professor. Ginger has a boy named Gino. Marianne has a girl named Maria. When they grow up, Gino and Maria have a child. This child will have three female ancestors, Mary, Ginger, Marianne, but only two male ancestors, Gino and the professor. If you think this is a bad example because it involves a half-brother marrying a half-sister, suppose that just as Gino and Maria come of age, they'll discover another clan living on the remote east side of the island. Island meets west, and Gino and Maria each marry another east side. But their children will still have fewer male than female ancestors in the west side portion of the family tree. And if the East Siders have a similar social structure, one alpha male grandfather who impregnated all the women on the East Side, then the children of Gino and Maria will have fewer male ancestors than in their lineage. Okay, so he just simply made a quick example just to rebut any of the responses that people may have in regards to this conversation, especially in the black community. So, and this is another reference point for you guys, and this was published March 17, 2015, said 8,000 years ago, 17 women reproduced for every one man, okay? And the article actually states an analysis of modern DNA uncovers a rough dating scene after the advent of agriculture. Once upon a time, 4,000 to 8,000 years after humanity invented agriculture, something very strange happened to the human reproduction. Across the globe, for every 17 women who are reproducing, passing on genes that are still around today, only one man did the same. It wasn't like there was a mass death of males. They were there, so what were they doing? Asked Melissa Wilson Sayers. She says, a computational biologist at Arizona State University and a member of the group, scientists uncovered this moment prehistory by analyzing modern birthing patterns. Okay, so it's basically mirroring the conversations that we have in these spaces. I hear people say the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the women only want 20% of the men. This was happening in, back in the past. So that's why you don't get that one of one. And let's go back to the point of the 69% or 72% that they were saying black men had children out of wedlock, because they saw the number of black women with 72% of children being born out of wedlock. And the black community just assumes that the ratio is 1-to-1. Like, for every one black man who had a child out of wedlock, there was one black woman who had a child out of wedlock. I know that sounds crazy, but that's how they justify these conversations in the black community. And we know that's not true, because we see the statistics, we look at the history. None of this supports anything that they're talking about. This is where you actually, explain to people how the methods of data were collected. And I actually got this, straight off the website, so we can prove the validity. It said methods data were collected through in-person interviews with the nationally representative sample of the household population aged 15 to 49 in the United States in 2015 to 2019. The sample was made up of 21,000 respondents aged 15 to 49, including 9,746 men and 11,695 women. The NSFG data response rate for the 2015 survey period was 65.9% for women and 62.4% for men. Now, this is important. Now, let me bring myself back up here, because I know people will question and say, oh, well, they only surveyed 21,000 people. That's not enough. BS. You can't get the whole population. And we did the statistical educational class where I showed you guys how you break down statistics, and you get a small percentage of the population and you survey them, and they can represent the whole population. This is simply what they did. They just extrapolated out the data after they got the responses, and this represents how the United States works in regards to fertility. Okay, so this next part is very important. A response rate of 50 to 60% or higher is generally considered optimal for survey research, because it's thought to minimize non-response bias. So I just told you guys that the response rate was 65.9% for women and 62.4% for men. So that is between 50 to 60%. So this constitutes a good report. And also the fertility measures in this report include ever had a biological child, number of children born alive or fathered, timing and relationship context of the first birth. Let's continue. The National Survey of Family Growth response rate for the 2011-2019 data collection period ranged from 64.5 to 74%. The cumulative response rate for this 8-year period was 67.7%. A response rate of 50 to 60% or higher is generally considered optimal for survey research, because it's thought to minimize non-response bias. Factors that can impact response rates include survey length, survey content, how the survey is administered, incentives, and number of follow-up surveys. And I discussed this and I educated you guys on how sometimes when I put out these fillers on the community post and I ask you a specific question, I would hope that you guys would answer it correctly, because I would have to throw those out. You guys remember from the community post, we did the statistical breakdown, and you guys seen If you didn't answer the question correctly, it had to get thrown out. So that's what happens here. So that's why they're basically telling you guys, like I told you prior, that survey content, how the survey is conducted and how it's administered, incentives, i.e. money, gift cards, they can all be issued out if you participate in one of these health and medical surveys, right? So if you don't, those are some of the things that can, help or hinder the response rates. Okay. Now this is where we answer the birth certificate question that is commonly used to invalidate the CDC's fertility statistics. Can a mother refuse to put a father on a birth certificate? Pros and cons. Yes, a mother can refuse to put the father's name on a birth certificate if the mother and father are not married at the time of child's birth. An increasingly common occurrence, with up to 40% of all births being to unmarried women, according to CDC. As you guys know, in the Black community is at 69.3% for Black women having children out of wedlock. According to the Centers for Disease Control's National Center for Health Statistics, roughly 40% of babies in the U.S. are born to mothers who are not married. While these babies do not have the stereotypical married parents, they still may have involved fathers who are present. That's another, like I said, they make it seem like Black men aren't present in their children's lives, but that's not the case. In some instances, fathers may be excluded from their children's birth certificates if they are absent from the birth. Another reason their name will be excluded is if the mother refuses to put the father's name on the birth certificate. Takeaways. At the time of birth, if the mother doesn't know who the father of the child actually is, that speaks more to a woman's sexual history than the correct man, in quotations, being placed on the birth certificate. Married couples don't have birth certificate issues because it's already assumed that the husband's name will be placed on the birth certificate. And even this isn't 100% due to a 2022 study published in Human Reproduction, delved into data from 1,211 men seeking paternity testing services in the United States. The findings revealed that 11% were not the biological father. And then also another significant study in 2023 featured in family relations focused on men mandated by courts to undergo paternity testing. The study found a substantial 12% were not biological fathers, emphasizing social factors like lower socioeconomic status and non-Caucasian ethnicity influencing non-paternity rates. It said there's no federal or state laws in the United States that requires DNA testing to establish paternity at birth. However, some states do require unmarried couples who have a paternity test to list the father's name on the birth certificate. If every man was given a mandatory DNA test at the time of birth, the percentage of fathers would actually be lower due to the percentages of paternity fraud. So using the all fathers are listed on the birth certificate only argument actually works it works in the woman's favor because it keeps the numbers as we see them. Because there will be a larger gap between the women who, have mother children and the men who have actually fathered children, Black men in particular. Okay, and I know that was a lot of reading, but this has to go on video so we can discuss this over social media. So in conclusion, this actually, ends the conversation of the point of Black men not all being on the birth certificates, because we just proved that majority of men don't have sex. The majority of Black men don't have children and have never fathered children. This goes all the way back into historical times. Black men are not the anomaly where you can sit there and say that if every other man or group of men, racial dynamic, have had less than 50% of kids, but Black men are the only men that have had more than 50% of the kids. It's absolutely not true. And to be, quite frank, Hispanic men are the only group of men in present day that have fathered more children than not. It's at 50.1% for the years between 2015 and 2019. 50.1%. So yeah, so that's the response. So if anybody has any concerns, you can read the reports. Again, these are not my statistics. These are for everybody to view and to learn. So that's why I'm here. So we can put out fires, so to speak. And like I said, if the Black community want to acknowledge this, so be it. The information is for you guys. Okay.